Welcome back to This Week in Racing, a mid-week update because I've missed the last week, I think week or two. Been traveling, obviously. We're getting into the most busy part of the year in terms of auto racing, and honestly, I couldn't have it any other way after the shutdown, but we've got a lot of things to talk about, and virtually all of them in this episode involve Roger Penske in one way or another. You want to talk about stonks, it's about dominating the news cycle. But we got some IMSA things to talk about, we've got NASCAR things to talk about, and we've got the big thing, which is the Indianapolis 500 attendance and the policies that will be released tomorrow in full. It's a 100-page document they're releasing tomorrow. We'll probably have to do another video just talking about that, but we have some info today that needs to be addressed immediately. So let's get into it. This week in racing. A few blurbs to start off. Obviously, we mentioned it in the two streams about the Iowa race for IndyCar, but the Aeroscreen finally had its first real test in terms of an accident and potentially saving a driver as Colton Herta drove over the back of Rinus VeeKay on an aborted restart in the middle of race number one. The damage to VeeKay's Aeroscreen tells the story. So really, this is not unprecedented in terms of an IndyCar crash. There have been several examples throughout the years of drivers driving over the top of each other, particularly over the top of the cockpit. But the fact that VeeKay did not have any impact to his helmet whatsoever is a very encouraging sign for future crashes and future impacts to come. It looks like this safety device is working as intended. Now, a couple of things to mention. A big implication of this crash meant that Colton Herta was essentially eliminated from both races when in race 2 his car was really not the same it had been in qualifying, and a driver who had been second in the points going in certainly was not there at the end of the weekend. And Mid-Ohio, which is the next race for IndyCar, will be the midway point in the season, and then it's followed up by the double point, the only double point race this year at the Indianapolis 500. So pretty much post Indy 500, we're going to have a really good idea of who, if anybody, can topple Scott Dixon for the IndyCar Championship. Formula One news. Fernando Alonso has announced that he will sign with Renault for the 2021 season and beyond. Now, a lot of people may jump to the fact that if he doesn't win the Triple Crown at the Indy 500 this year, will he come back for the Indy 500? Well, I need to remind you that the Monaco Grand Prix was moved for next year, away from the Indy 500 date. So theoretically, based on the Indianapolis 500 rules, the car qualifies and not the driver. So a driver such as Oriol Servia, for example, could qualify the car in the fastest 33 on the grid, and then Alonso would take over that ride and start at the rear. It's not an ideal situation, but it's not unprecedented either. Mario Andretti did it in his title debut, or his title defense years in Formula One. The other shoe to drop is the fact that Sebastian Vettel may end up going to the Racing Point Aston Martin team for next year. He's either going to replace Lance Stroll, fat chance of that, or Sergio Perez. The interesting thing about this is not only the fact that Vettel stays in Formula One, and also that the Racing Point team, after copying the Mercedes, seems to be in a really strong position, but the fact that for the first time since I would say around 2012, 2013, virtually every team on the grid has at least one world championship caliber driver. It may lead to a very competitive racing season in Formula One, at least in the midfield, presuming that Mercedes doesn't just run away and win every single race between now and the new cars debuting in 2022. There's a rumor out there that Roger Penske may buy Iowa Speedway. This comes on the heels of some financial difficulties with the Speedway, and the fact that they've lost their NASCAR dates for this year. But as a stalwart on the IndyCar championship, it seems like it would be a good move for Penske to do, and he commented to Racer.com specifically about that possibility, only mentioning, though, that they are currently in talks to lease the track for the events going into the future, and indeed as well this year. But Penske has owned racetracks before, and I think it would help significantly if Penske had a little bit more leverage in the schedule by owning a few more of the tracks that they race at. Remember, he really only has control over Indianapolis and Belle Isle and Detroit. Adding Iowa Speedway to that list would be beneficial. Tony Stewart and Ray Evernham have started a new IROC-style series called the Superstar Racing Experience. Tony Stewart is the first and only confirmed driver, but it seems like it's going to put together legends of the sport, such as Jeff Gordon or Tony Kanaan, to all race together on short tracks. It has a TV deal with CBS Sports, and it'll be interesting to see if modern-day IROC will be the smashing success that it was in its heyday. Now we move on to some of the more in-depth stories and the ones that I need to talk about a little bit more as such. Team Penske and Acura are planning on splitting for the 2021 IMSA season. That means no Penske sports car will be racing at all in 2021. Michael Shank and other teams have expressed interest in joining Acura in the DPI ranks in IMSA. But there are rumors that a Porsche LMDH will be coming down the line and that Penske will be the team that heads up that organization. Now, so there's a lot of different things that I feel like I need to talk about here. Number one is during the heyday of sports car racing, at least in the modern era, I think it was 2008. At that time, you had several different Acura-powered teams. You had Andretti Autosport, or Andretti Green as it was known then, DeFerrin Motorsports, Highcroft Racing, and Los Fernandez. And it seems like Acura is moving towards a strategy similar, where at least Meyer Shank is going to be one of the teams. It would almost certainly be, and then maybe a few other teams. Now, there's not really many solid rumors, though I would say some possibilities to look at would be United Autosports, which, while, yes, there's the elephant in the room that Zach Brown is McLaren, and Zach Brown owns United Autosports, and they don't have the best relationship with Honda. The IMSA team that United Autosports had here a couple of years ago was actually crewed by Andretti Autosport. And obviously Andretti Autosport is well within the Honda ranks, and they have sports car experience. I would also look at something like Chip Ganassi Racing. Is a Ford LMDH ever going to happen, or a Ford Hypercar? If not, why not go back to IMSA with an Acura? The other thing, or the other key thing here, is the fact that the split between Penske and Acura was on amicable terms, or at least they were on the same page, which is to say they were not on the same page, and that's why they split. So that, to me, and I'm reading between the lines here, freely admitting that, I think Penske wants to go to Le Mans, and I'm not sure Honda does. So that says to me, Penske is going to need a car that will be Le Mans eligible. And there is where you end up with the Porsche LMDH rumors that have been floating quite a bit in recent weeks. We know that Porsche is pulling out of IMSA at the end of the year from a factory perspective in GT racing, and Porsche seems to always have a love affair with Le Mans. Penske wants to win Le Mans overall, and I think a Penske Porsche, as we saw back in the ALMS days, would be a very potent combination. It would be something that I certainly think in the long term would spark a bunch of interest in both the International WEC Series and the domestic IMSA Series for that Penske-Porsche combination to resurface. It's also a good thing, by the way, for IMSA, or it's potentially a good thing. If the car count goes up because of this, let's say there's 3 or 4 Acuras rather than just 2 coming from the Penske team, that's an interesting and more diverse field of prototypes that will be racing for the overall win. As far as I'm concerned, this is pretty much a net positive for IMSA, even though obviously the loss of Penske, at least temporarily, is a short-term loss for sure. NASCAR announced today that there will be no practice for any of the top 3 touring series for the rest of the year. I'm just going to let that simmer. I'm sure you're already down in the comments typing what you think of it. And now we're going to bring it to my face. So what do I think of this? Now, you will remember that when NASCAR came back, I said specifically that I thought the lack of practice helped the racing product quite a bit in the races like at Darlington and Martinsville and Bristol as soon as NASCAR came back. And so while I haven't totally changed my mind, I think limited practice is, or no practice at tracks that teams have a lot of data is definitely a good thing. But when you start looking at some of the faster tracks, you start looking at Talladega, you look at Daytona, and when you start talking about new circuits, particularly when you're talking about Daytona, the fact that they're running the road course and they're going to run with absolutely no practice, to me, is a recipe for disaster. Just look at Indianapolis, for example. No practice there. There was a suspicion that the tires were not going to last, but there was no, concrete proof. Well, once you get to the race, you have tires blowing out, and eventually it took the leader of the race, Denny Hamlin, out of contention and had a massive accident. To me, you can get away with no practice at tracks where teams have a lot of data and there is lower speeds and less chance for serious accidents. But as far as I'm concerned, no practice is a bad idea at A, new tracks, or B, tracks that are significantly fast where if there is an accident, it could be potentially serious. So, and it's weird too, because while, again, from an entertainment standpoint, yeah, sure, no practice is great, if of course you can get past the mandatory competition caution that puts everybody to sleep. But to me, virtually every other series has practice. I'm trying to think actually of a series that is out there. Even NASCAR sanctioned series, ARCA, has practice, and they'll be racing on the same weekend as the Cup teams for the most part. So you look at IndyCar, you look at Formula One, who, by the way, if you're talking from a COVID standpoint, they're bringing literally people from tens of different countries all mixing together. If you're already doing testing, I do not see why NASCAR is making practice a COVID issue. It makes me scratch my head. There doesn't seem to be any evidence in any of the other racing series that it's a problem to practice. And I've had it explained to me that NASCAR doesn't want the teams to bring backup cars to the track. I understand that, but that's where you write a rule that says if you crash your car and you can't repair it, you're out. And I understand it's the same reason there's provisionals and top 35 rules and charter systems. Is because if Chase Elliott crashes in practice and he can't fix his car, nobody's going to tune into the race because Chase can't race. I ain't tuning in. I understand that, but at the same time, there are some things that I'm just not super comfortable. I mean, that Daytona race, and especially if they add another chicane, that'll suck. If they're so unsure about the layout of Daytona and they have to add another chicane, just run it on the oval at that point. Because if you're not going to run the full Daytona road course, don't even do it at all, as far as I'm concerned. It's they're going to ruin that event, not make it as interesting. Just a big meh. So, in my opinion, practice for most tracks. Doesn't have to be at all tracks, but I think, why not? And finally, big major story. The Indy 500 announced that they will operate at a 25% capacity, which is reduced from the originally announced capacity of 50% for the delayed 2020 Indianapolis 500 on August 23rd. Now, it's important to note that no one who has bought tickets is losing them. And in fact, they're still selling tickets if you're looking to go to the Indianapolis 500 until Friday. Nathan Brown of the Indianapolis Star reported that this new attendance figure will be just under 90,000 people, around 87.5 for those keeping score at home. And there will be more details released tomorrow, as IMS stated that there will be a 100-page document which will document absolutely everything to do with the COVID procedures for this year's Indianapolis 500. Okay, so we got a lot to break down here, obviously, because, and again, it's going to be a developing situation. So I'm going to state when I'm totally speculating or talking about things that are not confirmed, going to be very open about that. So strictly from the perspective of a 25% reduction, I'm not going to be too upset about it. Absolutely, it's trending in the wrong direction. It's trending in the direction of no fans, which I think a lot of people are worried about, myself included. But the way things currently are, I do not have a problem with, and here's why. Ultimately, what this has come down to is Indianapolis saw that there was about a 25% interest from the usual capacity, which is almost 400,000. You can do the math with that one. Almost 400,000 people usually go to the Indy 500. There's about 90,000 that still want to buy tickets. And they had that information from the various fan surveys where the current ticket holders were asked if they wanted to defer their tickets to next year. Some of them chose to do that. Some of them clearly did not. So being able to put a hard cap on it after already putting one cap on it, I think is important for several reasons. And honestly, I think right now it's the best possible scenario. I would be making a lot more noise if people were losing their tickets, and they may still do, by the way. There may eventually be a restriction placed from the governor or from the mayor that will eliminate all or most of the fans. I'm still expecting that to be a possibility at some point. And believe me, I'm going to light them up when they do. But the current situation, the current solution, I think is best for everybody. The people who did not feel safe in going won't go. The people who do feel safe in going will be able to go. And there's the added bonus that IMS gets to appease the politicians a little bit by appearing to reduce the seating capacity when in reality, it was probably going to be about this number anyway. And why do I bring up politicians? Don't want to get too political here, obviously, but ultimately, I hear people ask me this, especially when I bring up the politicians and what they think. Well, the virus isn't political, you say. And I agree. Obviously, it's a little bug that goes in your mouth, in completely layman's terms. It doesn't have a political party. It doesn't vote. It's not registered, obviously. But the people who make the decisions on COVID restrictions and who can do what and what is going to be worn, by the way, masks are required too. That won't be a big deal to those of you who are anti-mask. Just like drink a beer the whole time. You won't have to wear a mask. But anyway, the whole point of bringing up politicians is that if they get panicked or if there is a large enough groundswell of anti-large crowd sentiment within the voter base, they are going to come down hard on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It doesn't matter what agreements they have with the Speedway. It doesn't matter what they've been telling the Speedway. It doesn't matter what the Speedway has said to its paying customers. So from a political standpoint, this is still going to be touch and go all the way up until the race is at 101, lap 101. When it's an official race, I'll be confident that the governor isn't going to come down in and shut it down. But it's also important to note, I've seen a lot of people on social media saying, well, what's the matter with you Americans? You guys politicize everything. Well, welcome to an election year in 2020. Again, not to get too political, but both sides seem to be extremely intent on hitting the frickin' accelerator and driving us right into a frickin' wall for their own, own political agendas. That's just the way things work, and they are just totally willing to, get everybody up into a tizzy and get everybody on various sides when common sense would go a very long way. And so I hope common sense prevails here, I guess is my point. There's still a lot of questions. What about practice and qualifying attendance? If fans are barred from that, are they going to provide alternatives that are fan-friendly for people to be able to watch? Meaning, hey, maybe you want to bring back the YouTube streams. Maybe you want to have free NBC Sports Gold access. There's so many questions, and many of them, again, are going to be answered tomorrow. Again, it's funny, too. I guess I'll leave on this. I actually expected the attendance to be much closer to the original cap of 50%. Virtually everybody I talked to who had tickets, even some who were considering not going, eventually decided to go. But then I realized, of course, that many of the people that I talked to are in the lower risk categories. And a lot of the people who go to the Indy 500 are in the higher risk categories. So again, I totally respect anybody's decision, whether you want to go or whether you don't want to go. That's great. But I'm going to make a hardline stance here. I think it absolutely should be up to your choice whether you want to go to the Indy 500 or whether you don't. And ultimately, this is going to be a huge event. It's going to be a major mainstream event. There are going to be huge amounts of articles. There's going to be lots of outrage about fans at the Indy 500, no matter what the number. They're not going to care about a NASCAR race in Texas. They're not going to care about a race at Road America or a race at Iowa that has fans. But the Indy 500 is one thing that will get you Twitter clout if you're a blue checkmark, for example. So just be ready for it. It's coming. There's going to be a huge bunch of outrage in the week leading up to the Indy 500. Batten down the hatches. Be ready for it. It's going to happen. Just, if you're a fan, if you're somebody who wants the Indy 500 to happen, don't give them a click. If you see something that looks like it's clickbait trash coming from someone who doesn't understand what they're talking about, don't click on it. Don't share it. Don't be outraged about it. It will end. Only share people who you think are being fair, or talk about people whose articles are being fair. Don't go for the rage bait from people who don't pay any attention to racing. There you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Probably going to be talking about this again tomorrow. So if you enjoyed me splattering my brain fodder all over the screen, and if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do that. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.